Rich kid humiliates janitor at school, finds out. He was a top scientist. What happens when a rich, privileged student, used to mocking those he deems beneath him, humiliates someone only to later discover that the person he disrespected once held a prestigious title in a field he could never even dream of? A simple act of cruelty can change everything. This is a story of karma, of humbling realizations, and of how the truth can surprise even the most arrogant among us. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, casting a warm glow on the sprawling campus of Crestwood Academy, a school that catered to the wealthiest families in the city. Located in the heart of the affluent district, Crestwood was a symbol of privilege, with its pristine lawns, towering brick buildings, and state-of-the-art facilities. It was a school where students didn't just study. They made connections, secured future opportunities, and built legacies. Among the students of Crestwood was Jason Harris, a 17-year-old with the kind of wealth and status most could only dream of. Jason's father was a CEO of a tech company, and his mother was a renowned philanthropist. Jason was used to being treated with the utmost respect, and he was confident that his future was as certain as his present. He had it all: the best clothes, the fastest car, and the most prestigious friends. In Jason's mind, his life was perfect, and everyone around him was simply a stepping stone or a servant to his success. But there was one person at Crestwood Academy who Jason saw as beneath him: the school janitor, a quiet older man named Mr. George Patterson. Mr. Patterson had worked at the school for as long as anyone could remember. His clothes were always simple, his demeanor humble, and his duties were often unappreciated. He cleaned the classrooms, mopped the hallways, and took care of the grounds. To Jason, Mr. Patterson was just another part of the invisible workforce that kept the school running, and in Jason's eyes he was nothing more than a lowly servant. It wasn't unusual for Jason to mock Mr. Patterson from time to time. He'd see the janitor hunched over, sweeping the floors, and snicker with his friends. Sometimes he'd make loud comments about how pathetic it was for someone to be so content with such a lowly job, all while Jason was heading off to expensive dinners, shopping sprees, and weekend getaways with his wealthy friends. One chilly autumn morning, as Jason walked through the hallways with his friends, he saw Mr. Patterson in the corner, cleaning the windows. Jason rolled his eyes and grinned at his friends. "Hey, look at this," he said, his voice loud enough for the janitor to hear. "Still cleaning up after all of us? Maybe you should try harder, George. Maybe you'll get promoted to a real job." His friends laughed, and Jason could feel a rush of superiority. To him, it was all in good fun, harmless teasing. After all, people like Mr. Patterson were meant to be laughed at, right? They were beneath him, and he could say whatever he wanted. Mr. Patterson didn't respond. He simply continued cleaning the window, his face as neutral as always. But Jason noticed the brief flicker of sadness in his eyes, and for a moment, he felt something he couldn't quite place. But he quickly dismissed it. Who cared? He was Jason Harris, the future of Crestwood, and no one could touch him. The days passed, and Jason's life remained as comfortable as ever. But one morning, something unexpected happened. As he entered his chemistry class, he noticed an unfamiliar face sitting at the teacher's desk. It was Mr. Patterson. Jason raised an eyebrow. "What's he doing here?" he whispered to his friend Alex, who shrugged in confusion. The teacher, Mrs. Harris, who was typically warm and friendly, looked up from her papers, slightly flustered. "Ah, Mr. Patterson, thank you for joining us today," she said with an unusual tone of respect. "I'm sure you all know Mr. Patterson, our janitor, but what you may not know is that he is also a guest lecturer today on the topic of advanced physics." Jason's jaw dropped. Physics? The janitor was here to lecture on physics? It didn't make sense. Was this some sort of joke? "Mr. Patterson, I've invited you to speak with our class about your experience in the field of science," Mrs. Harris continued. "Please, go ahead." Mr. Patterson stood up, removing his worn jacket and revealing a crisp white shirt underneath. He walked to the front of the class, and Jason could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him. The janitor, a man who cleaned up after them, was about to teach them? This was unbelievable. Jason sat back in his chair, crossing his arms. He expected this to be some boring, drawn-out lecture, but as Mr. Patterson began speaking, Jason's arrogance quickly began to fade. The man spoke with authority, his voice steady and clear. He described the theoretical principles behind quantum mechanics, particle physics, and advanced computational theories with a confidence that seemed to shock the entire class. "I have spent many years researching quantum theory," Mr. Patterson said. "My work has contributed to the development of some groundbreaking technologies in the field of advanced physics. But my most recent work was in collaboration with some of the leading scientists at CERN, where we developed new models for particle acceleration." Jason's eyes widened. CERN? Particle acceleration? This was the kind of work Jason had only read about in textbooks. It was the kind of work that made headlines in scientific journals. He glanced around at the class, trying to gauge their reactions. They were listening intently, hanging on every word Mr. Patterson spoke. "What is going on here?" Jason whispered under his breath. As Mr. Patterson continued, he went on to describe the intricate details of his research, the breakthroughs he had achieved, and the prestigious institutions he had once worked for. Jason could hardly believe what he was hearing. This was no ordinary janitor. This was a man who had been at the forefront of scientific discovery, someone who had dedicated his life to changing the world. When the lecture ended, Jason sat in stunned silence. He couldn't wrap his mind around what he had just learned. The janitor, the man he had mocked and belittled, was a genius, a scientist whose work had impacted global scientific understanding. But why had he chosen to work as a janitor at Crestwood? Why had he given up his prestigious career? Jason couldn't shake the feeling of guilt and disbelief that had taken root in his chest. After class, he found himself wandering the halls, trying to process the truth he had just learned. Eventually, he found Mr. Patterson near the front door, getting ready to leave for the day. Jason approached him, his heart pounding in his chest. "Mr. Patterson," Jason began, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say. I never knew. I humiliated you, and I was wrong." Mr. Patterson turned slowly to face him. There was no anger in his eyes, no bitterness, just a quiet calm. "I don't hold grudges, Lucas," Mr. Patterson replied, his voice steady. "You didn't know. You were young and you didn't understand, but now you do." Jason swallowed hard. "But why? Why are you here? Why would you give up all that, everything, for a job like this?" Mr. Patterson paused, looking out the window. "I didn't give it up. I walked away. After years of working in the field, I realized something. The world of academia, of high-profile research, it wasn't for me anymore. It became a world of competition, ego, and politics. I wanted peace. I wanted to find purpose in simplicity. So I chose this path, to teach, to live humbly, and to make a difference in my own way. I don't need accolades or fame. I find fulfillment in knowing I've contributed in ways that matter." Jason was speechless. The man he had once thought of as nothing more than a servant was, in reality, a beacon of wisdom and humility. In the days that followed, Jason couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Patterson. He had been humbled, and the guilt he felt for his past actions lingered. He began to see the world differently, realizing that success wasn't measured by wealth or status. It was about purpose, knowledge, and making a difference. He approached Mr. Patterson the next day, this time with a sense of respect. "I want to learn from you," Jason said, his voice sincere. "I want to understand what you know, not just about science, but about life, about making an impact." Mr. Patterson smiled, his eyes filled with quiet approval. "I think you're ready to learn, Jason. The journey isn't about what you achieve for yourself, but what you do for others." Jason's transformation didn't happen overnight, but slowly, over time, he became more humble, more thoughtful. He found himself studying science with renewed passion, eager to contribute to the world in a meaningful way. And as for Mr. Patterson, he continued his work as a janitor at Crestwood, content in the knowledge that he had taught an invaluable lesson, one that Jason would never forget. The story of Jason Harris and Mr. Patterson serves as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that true greatness often lies in unexpected places. It's a story of redemption, of learning humility, and of understanding that the most important things in life can't always be measured by wealth, fame, or social status.